Thank you so much, Claire, and thank you everyone who has joined us today, and to my fellow colleagues who have spoken so far. With the Global Observatory, the mission is to support the sector in terms of keeping an eye on the targets around gender equality across sport for development, across physical education and physical activity. So that whole iteration that the sector comprises of. And our main interest is that the focus on gender equality uh, is integrated across all the different targets and all the different development aims. Because our understanding is that we cannot make claim to be meeting or fulfilling development aims if the implications from a gendered perspective are not resulting in improved outcomes and living outcomes for everybody in the society, for girls and women in all their diversity. So that's why our interest cuts across all the SDGs, and we're interested in this conceptualization of development and peace as we articulate it when it comes to sport for development and peace. And would like to draw attention, and perhaps this is a question for everybody present today in this session, around what is our understanding of development and what's our understanding of peace. Where are we anticipating to see development and to see peace? At what levels is our work aiming to have outcomes and impacts? A lot of conversations around development and peace are we're thinking mass scale, population level, but we could also ask questions about what we see at community level, what we see in smaller units, could even be schools or sports clubs or sports organizations where we work. When it comes to the questions around gender equality, as I mentioned, our first priority is ensuring it stays on the agenda. When we have discussions around development work, we're working with finite resources, we're working with limited attention span. So we see a shift in what gets prioritized in development work, what comes almost to be fashionable or in or demanding of the attention and resources that are available in the space. And so it remains really important to keep gender on the sort of priorities and to keep an eye on monitoring and tracking that outcome. If we are focusing on outcomes, for example, around health or health and well-being or poverty or any of the other SDGs, making sure that we still can conceptualize the success or positive outcomes in those domains by ensuring we're checking on what's happening with around gender equality. And that's one of the challenges for the Sports for Development and Peace movement, because taking on all the goals at once would not be practical for the kinds of institutions that we work in. But as my colleagues have said, working in a really systematic and interconnected way is important. And to do so requires keeping certain things as a thread, as non-negotiables, as in built and embedded criteria of success. So perhaps one question I would like us to think about is what development areas where we are seeing sustained actions. What are we seeing continuing to happen in the Sports for Development and Peace movement? And beyond 2030, what would we recommend as really significant to take on? And I think, as James highlights, I carry that conversation forward to say it's really important to strengthen the leadership of civil society across sport for development and peace. The root and the source and history of sport for development and peace movements has been within civil society. So I think we should sustain that leadership, and for two reasons. It's ensuring that we fulfill one of the development goals, which is around participation in society. It's participation in leadership. It's also ensuring that we can build those partnerships and cooperation. and societies where people can participate and engage freely. So the outcome of developing the Sport for Development movement also contributes to that. The second piece of why that's really important is the work that can be done in terms of not only supporting accountability of state duty bearers or holding them to account for the responsibilities they have, but it's also facilitating and maintaining a sustained active involvement in development and peace outcomes, in defining what the issues are, as well as in moving towards the progress that we need to see. And one example that I would give of that is the Sport for Social Change Network in South Africa, which is a network that was started with civil society, the corporate sector, and now they have worked in such a way that they have a collaboration with the government of South Africa, and a development aim they are working towards is around reducing poverty and other goals as well. And they are implementing the National Youth Service Program. So through the SSCN, they recruit from the sports community into the national program and channel resources to ensure that youth from the sports community can have jobs outside and beyond sport as provided through the government program, access to entrepreneurship resources, as well as education opportunities. So playing the role of not only the ones to deliver a service, but being that connector of the sport for development community and people to government service delivery. And at the same time, they're engaging with researchers within the University of Johannesburg and beyond to provide the knowledge support, the M&E, as well as the insights that they would develop from that engagement. So you see that collaboration that is also embedding and moving from policy level of here's how the government would like to deliver services to a sports mobilizing institution, making that connection. And this is not only work within Africa, but also mobilizing the rest of the region across Africa, and also contributing to influence at policy level within the African Sports Council, which is an arm of the African Union. I'll give a second example of what kind of sustained action can take us into the future, or what we should sustain beyond 2030. And it's intergovernmental cooperation, having action across different governments and making sure that this aim around sport for development is incorporated and embedded. I too will speak about the Southeast Asian countries. I think in the room, my colleague Aya Noguchi is here at Seijo University. They're leading and supporting this program of the Japan Asian Actions, specifically on gender equality in sport. And three key outcomes they're working on: capacity building, making sure there are plans across the different countries at government level and civil society level and sports organizations level specifically, such as Olympic committees and sports bodies, and that there's monitoring, research and reporting, including developing shared indicators and gathering the data to track it. So this kind of collaboration helps to embed within the society or the region that collaboration is one way to approach the work, and there's shared ownership and shared leadership, and each actor can leverage their community either to influence policy, to implement it, to develop it, or to track and have shared accountability. And that's specifically on gender equality. And a positive learning from that is the selection by each country of what their priority targets are, even within the broader goals around gender equality. Some would select dealing with gender-based violence, which was several of them. There's focus on leadership. There's a focus on media and portrayal. So you see these different targets, which Ian has referred to, of how we break down the concept of gender equality, and you work on particular targets according to your priorities, needs, and where you have commitment and resources. So that would be a positive work that can help to consolidate the work that's being done, and we can move that forward. In Europe, with the Council of Europe, one interesting development, also part of the enlarged partnership agreement on sport, And they have established a network of magistrates and prosecutors for sport, working around sport. And so I think this sort of speaks with the theme around justice, but not only in terms of prosecution, but they're also working on topics of prevention, on understanding legislative system, prosecution processes, in order to have prevention, in order to have appropriate response for the kind of circumstances and issues that arise in and through sport. So we see that across these examples, there's the connection between state responsibility and sort of state policy legislation and how we want things to actually move forward, and having closer and integrated collaboration with civil society, broader civil society as in organizations that are non-governmental and might work on these particular development themes, and those that are sport-based, sport for development and peace initiatives. Again, when it comes to gender-based violence, we see this intergovernmental leadership, say for example, from the African Union Sports Council, who last year have set up their working group on safeguarding in sport that's also comprised of civil society, government actors, to move from not only the policy formulation to actually support in-country implementation and cross-country collaboration. So across these themes, I think we are returning to the very thematic or basis of the Sustainable Development Goals, which is about collaboration, about shared aims and a shared vision of where we want to be in the future. Now, as a sector, in terms of sport for development, the things we should reflect on, where having spoken about these good practices, what should we be doing in terms of legislation and policy? Not only legislating at one state level, but how can we have shared expectations around how we can reinforce the targets that will be met through sports for development, and that those can be secured either through policy, through legislation, through embedded cultural practices as well. It's also really important to reflect on what we do about research and knowledge. With the Global Observatory, our main task is to support the sector with data, with knowledge, and with its translation from one space to the next, from the researchers and academic world to policymakers, from the policymakers and vice versa, as well as from the practice institutions. And beyond the current SDGs, we think these forms of or these configurations of cooperation and collaboration, which are multi-sector and are comprised of like government, civil society, and individuals as well, are going to remain important. For gender equality, we need to come back to the basic question of what should the future look like if we have addressed the gender equality question. And as a priority, what kind of freedoms will women and girls have when we have fulfilled our missions as sports for development movements? And what actors should be included in this work? It would also be important to reflect a little bit more on what the principles and cultures within the sports for development movements that we are creating are. At the moment, we would be able to see that there are some hierarchies that are emerging in terms of what type of sports for development institution who gets to focus on particular work, which institutions can access certain funding. And we've seen a replication of the traditional NGO structure, the NGO architecture and movements, where we sort of have, similar to corporate sector, we have the international mega companies. Now we've got these mega NGOs, and we've got these collaborations and really, really massive institutions, and becoming very bureaucratic and removed and creating several steps before you can see a development outcome. Secondly, we should reflect a little bit more that when we're talking about sport for development or sport for peace, peace for who and peace at what level? There is still issues within sport around gender-based violence, and that intersects, for example, with domestic violence, because people involved in sport do have a domestic reality. And what is the concern of sport for development movements for that level of society? What is our concern when it comes to lack of peace or conflict and disruption in people's lives due to war or due to resource deprivation, shifts in political decisions that hamper people's freedoms and movements, and can actually be institutional forms of violence. So as sports for development movements, we see this pattern of NGOization, where we are becoming professional NGOs and doing service delivery, which helps achieve development outcomes. However, is the sort of power movement, the power shifting effort of the origins of sport for development, is that still there, or is that getting lost? Because we're getting comfortable and want 9 to 5 SDP style. However, where is the advocacy and the movement and the policy influence that needs to happen? And which topics do we see as fitting within sports for development? Or those topics become untouchable because they don't fit in log frames, or they might upset state funding that we are relying on. So these are the kinds of questions I think we need to reflect on if we should be considering what happens after 2030. I will end here and look forward to our own ongoing conversations. And in closing, I end with saying that our interests are that we have a society where people have the freedom to live full lives in the healthiest way that they can, with full well-being. Thank you.